Yep.
Good morning. Welcome to the webinar. This is the webinar, What Language Guest Speaker Series, sponsored by Nebraska Department of Education, What Language, and the CLTA, Small Interest Group K-12. So here is the mission of NDE What Language. Empower educators to engage students in the authentic use of word language while standard-based instruction to fulfill a range of functions from expressing personal needs to communicating in the workplace and to establishing strategic relationship across cultures so that they may learn, earn, and live. This is actually a tentative mission statement. I would like to invite all of you to give me feedback so I can update. Also, I would like to share with you the vision statement and also okay, here we go. Vision statement and the purpose statement of NDE What Language. Now I'm dropping this into the chat. Okay, copy link. Okay. It seems I need to stop sharing. My laptop is not working properly. This is a link, and I'm inviting all of you to give feedback. And on this, for this statements, mission statement, vision statement, and also purpose statement. So then we can have statement works for everybody. I mean, all the language teachers in Nebraska. Here we go again. Also, this is our collaborator for this guest speaker series, CLTA K-12. Their mission is to the special interest group of K-12 classroom and the methodology will create a professional platform to connect K-12 Chinese teachers from which they could update and refresh their Chinese classroom teaching skills and enrich their Chinese pedagogy and methodology. We invited them because we have very limited Chinese resources in the state. So they come to help us. Yeah, and today Danielle is going to share her experience being the only teacher in the building. And I'm very excited to learn from her. On June 4th, we're going to have Kara to present on finding joy in the challenges of teaching world languages in 21st century. So if you are interested in becoming one of our guest speakers in the fall, please scan the QR code, and this is our Google form, so you can respond, and then we can plan from there. All the guest speaking series, all the recordings of our webinars will be on this page. It's actually our NDE What Language guest speaker series page. Yeah, that's all I need to talk about. And thank you for coming. And Danielle, please, it's your turn. Take it away.
Do I have screen sharing abilities? Do you know?
I think so.
Okay, yes, I do. All right. Well, hello there. My name is Danielle Fulcher. I have been the Spanish teacher at Freeman down in Adams, Nebraska for the last 5 years or so. I am hoping to transition into Lincoln Public Schools this upcoming year, but I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to share my experiences being the only Spanish teacher in the building, because a lot of us, you know, some of us who've never taught at a larger school in a bigger department, we're the only resource for our students. And while there are certain amounts of freedom that can come with this, it's also a very difficult kind of a job. So let me share my screen with my presentation here. Go the slides down. Okay, so what I actually came up with, the way I set up my curriculum for my students, I actually followed a spiral method for it. And the first time I heard the term spiraled curriculum, I was in my methods class for my science teaching endorsement. I'm dually endorsed in world language teaching for secondary students and science teaching for world language students. And actually, before I get into that story, I'll just kind of tell you how I came about this. But for most of you, what I'm going to talk about for today is what is spiral curriculum, who came up with it, what does it look like, what are some potential benefits for this, how can you spiral your curriculum for your language students, probably the most important part of my presentation. I do have an example scope and sequence for you all, so you can copy that into your drives and manipulate it however you wish. And how effective is this curriculum? I do have a little bit of data that actually goes with this for most of you logical-minded folks. So this will kind of give you an idea of how effective this model can actually help you in your teaching. But for most of you, if you are, a foreign language teacher in a larger district or a larger school where you're the only, say, Chinese teacher, or you're the only German teacher in there, or if you are, like me, the only world language teacher in a rural school, this is your life, So on top of having to go to meetings, doing paperwork, planning lessons, all those kinds of things, you more than likely have multiple preps or multiple classes that you teach. At my school, I was responsible for the 8th grade Spanish exploratory class, along with Spanish levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's 5 different preps that I taught each day. And also at a smaller school, you're probably being responsible for additional activities and sponsorships. For instance, I was the assistant speech coach and the high school quiz bowl sponsor for that. Not to mention I was on a couple of different committees, and so my time was extremely limited. And all of this that you see before you, this happened before the COVID pandemic, before remote learning came into, our daily teaching lives and having to do hybrid learning environments. This is our life. And if you want to maintain good teaching practices while at the same time maintaining this level of responsibility, you have to be an absolutely extraordinary teacher or superhuman, I think, for that. So a couple of years back, I told myself, I have to figure out another way for this. This is not sustainable. This is not working. So I go back to the spiral curriculum method. And what it actually is, it's actually a theorem of curriculum designed by Jerome Bruner. He's an educational psychologist from Harvard. And the main idea of a spiraled curriculum model is it's in which the same subject matter is taught at various levels with increasing depth and breadth. So at your most elementary level, your level 1 students, you teach the basics, you teach the most important, the most common concepts. And as they continue on throughout the year, you very deliberately include revision and review on this, but then you also scaffold that review to continue on throughout each successive year with this. And as you go further into the material, your difficulty level increases and you increase that mastery for each of the students for those. And like I said, I first came across the term spiral curriculum when I was studying for my science methods class. And this was a study done by Norman Hare, a professor at California State University. And he was comparing the layered science curriculum of the United States and the spiral curriculum method in Chinese schools. So in the US, the science curriculum typically follows this model that you see off to the right here. Usually in 7th and 8th grade, they do life science, earth science. Then they take physical science, biology, chemistry, and physics. They only focus on one of these disciplines for the entire year. Whereas in contrast, schools in China, and I know we have several Chinese teachers here, please sound off in the comments if I am way off base on this. But for Chinese students, they take the 3 principal science classes of biology, chemistry, and physics at the same time. but they take it for 4 to 5 years in a row. And each successive year, they very deliberately build on their information that they learned the previous year. They go more in depth with the concepts and the things that they study, and thereby they increase their amount of retention and their mastery of each of these 3 subjects. And I was thinking, you know what, this would be a really, really good idea to implement for world language. And as I realized, being the only Spanish teacher at my school, that gave me quite a bit of degree of freedom in how I set up my classes. So last couple of years, I worked on combining this curriculum model with how this would look in a world language classroom. So for here, and as I was putting this together, I realized there were many, many different benefits to using this kind of a model versus a layered curriculum. So the main, most important benefit is repetition, 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 which in any discipline that you teach, not just world languages, repetition is key to reinforce that kind of knowledge in your brain. But it's especially important in languages because as you continue your language studies, in my mind, foreign language information, it has a very, very rapid rate of intellectual decay. If you don't use it, you lose it much more quickly. So that repetition will help reinforce that information in your students. Another very important point is it will lower the affective filters for your students and make it less stressful for them. An affective filter, that's the stress and emotional threshold that students have when they come into your classroom. If their affective filter is extremely high, meaning they're stressed out, they're worried, they're scared, they are not going to be learning. With the way my curriculum is set up, with that extra repetition, that kind of comfort level gets put into the students. It's the reason why we like watching the same movies over and over again, or reading the same books over and over again. It's that comfort of knowing the outcome for these kinds of things. It's less stressful for us. It's much more enjoyable. So a spiral curriculum will help lower those affective filters. With the third point, it will maximize their retention of information, not just throughout the year, but as they continue on with their language. I'm sure many of us have come across former students or, many adults in our lives who tell us a phrase, yeah, I took, 3 or 4 years in high school and I don't remember a thing for Spanish, which is so helpful. This kind of a model, if it's implemented correctly, it can kind of help prevent that loss of information once you've stopped taking the language. That will maximize the retention for those students. And probably the best one here is our last point. You can minimize your workload while not sacrificing good teaching practices. If you combine your levels into a spiraled curriculum model, you can repeat practice activities across the levels. So for introducing new material in your first level class, you can reuse those activities as a review in your successive classes for that. You can use and reuse resources. For those of you who use embedded reading, this is a great opportunity to use them. You can use a basic text at your first level. You can expand it into your next level and just reuse the same text over and over again. So you minimize the amount of resources that you have to maintain in order to teach these classes. So how I got started with this, I took the ideas from Norman Hare and then Jerome Bruner, and I started looking for resources on how to organize my curriculum so that it would make sense with this. And I found this book, The Natural Approach, it's Language Acquisition in the Classroom, by our very favorite Stephen D. Krashen. He's, the father of comprehensible input theory and the affective filter hypothesis, pretty much all of our favorite hypotheses as world language teachers. He published this book in the 60s. And one thing I should mention for a spiral curriculum, it does kind of require you to go off the textbook, because while textbooks are very good about spiraling the grammar concepts that we teach, they're not very good about reviewing and reinforcing the rest of it. So vocabulary terms, communication situations, some of the culture themes in there. it's wildly different from year to year. If you look at some of the common textbooks that we have, they don't deliberately spiral all of it. It's just strictly the grammar, which we know that's the one thing students remember from their years in foreign language classrooms. Not exactly. So this was the main resource I used for determining what the themes would be for each of the units that I taught. And in this particular book, in chapter 4, Dr. Krashen outlines 18 different communicative topics and situations. And these topics, they focus on mainly the communicative aspect of language. If a student was dropped in the middle of Paris, or if they were sent to the middle of Mexico City, what would they need to know how to do in order to survive in that kind of communicative context? Some of the examples were asking for directions or talking about weekend plans, etc. So from those 18 main concepts, I filtered it down into 6 general categories. So these are my units for the first 3 years of language teaching. My Unit 1, Greetings and All About Me. Unit 2, Recreation Activities. Unit 3, School and Career. Unit 4, Shopping, Running Errands. Unit 5, Food. And then Unit 6, A Healthy Life. For my students in Spanish 1, 2, and 3, these are the same topics that we study each and every year. But each and every year that they continue with their studies, we go more in depth with the material within that general thematic unit. And I do have an example on the next few slides here. So if we take a look at my 3rd unit, School and Careers, I'll kind of outline some of the objectives from each of those years. So in Spanish 1, these are my I can statements. These are the main objectives that we try to assess in that first year. I can talk about what core classes and basic supplies I have at school. So this is you talking about English classes, math, science, etc. What supplies do you need? Pencil, notebook, all those kinds of really basic sorts of things. The next one, I can describe my teachers and the subjects at school, which subjects are boring, which subjects are interesting, which teachers are more difficult, which teachers are more outgoing, those kinds of things. I can explain different activities I do while in my classes. You know, that's things like taking notes, reading the book, listening to the teacher, actually scratch that, hearing the teacher, because we know not all of our students actually listen to us. They might hear us, but they don't actually listen some of the time. And then of course I can tell time in Spanish. And one thing I do want to point out, you can switch the word Spanish to whatever language you teach. I can tell time in French. I can tell time in German. These main objectives you can modify to whatever language you teach in your classroom. But these are examples of objectives from my first level of language. The next year, again, we're still talking about school and careers, but the objectives have slightly changed. They have gotten a little bit more difficult and they're going to go a little bit more in depth. So the first objective for Spanish 2, I can talk about advanced classes I have at school. So in Spanish 1, we were talking about just the basic core classes, math, English, science, etc. In year 2, we kind of expand those classes to include more specific subjects. So for math, we would talk about algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus. For science, we talk about biology, chemistry, physics. We go more in depth with each of those classes. The next one, I can talk about what I did last year in different classes and what I'm going to study next year. So in this level, we talk about expanding the time frame of when you do these things. We mix in the past tense and the present tense when studying about your activities in class. The last couple of objectives, they take more of a cultural kind of a focus with it. So I can compare different study habits and ways to succeed in school. Now, here in Nebraska, I'm not sure if everybody here on the webinar is from Nebraska, but we have our 5 standards for the world language department, and one of which is cognition, where students have to demonstrate that they can set goals for themselves and talk about how they want to succeed in school. And this 3rd objective will match that standard for those. The last one, I can compare school days in the United States and Spanish-speaking countries. Again, you can change this to whatever language you teach. You can compare school days in the United States to German-speaking schools or Chinese-speaking schools. What does that school day look like? What time do classes start? How long are the classes, etc. So this is our year 2. Then again, for year 3, we are still studying the same overall thematic unit. We're still talking about schools and careers. But again, we're increasing the difficulty level. We are going more in depth with the material, while at the same time very deliberately reviewing and revising some of the previous information that we've learned and building that really, really strong schema of information in our students' minds. So here we talk about classes I need to become a professional in various fields. So these are the more specific classes that are related directly to a specific job. Like for instance, a psychologist, they would need a psychology class at least, or a business class. They would probably need maybe an international business or possibly even more computer technology based classes. Then here we also talk about listing different jobs and professions and matching them with their duties. So again, we review those classes by matching those jobs that they're looking for along with the classes that you take in school. So it's again, that review not only through each year, but within the unit and throughout for those. We continue on describing our learning goals and what you wish to achieve in your career. And then we talk about career education paths in schools between the United States and other countries for those. Because in this year, typically these are mostly juniors, at least for my class, and we really kind of tend to hit the career education and preparation, especially in their junior year. So this actually fulfills the requirement of cross-curricular education as well. But in each of these 3 years, we're still within this overall unit of school and careers. We just go more in depth each successive year. And we help the students retain that information by that constant repetition, that very deliberate review and building on top of their previous schema. So to kind of give you an example, this is probably going to be the best part about this presentation. I do have an example spiral curriculum scope and sequence. And once this presentation is made available to you, this link will actually allow you to make a copy of this. If you have a Google email, you make a copy of this, and this is my example scope and sequence for those. And it has a bunch of different pieces of information, which once you have your own copy, you can edit it to whatever language you teach and levels that you teach. So you can adjust the course expectations. Actually, I'm going to go to level 1 here. For the course expectations that you can determine by your school or whatever standards you have for your state, you can manipulate the language in whatever way you wish. By the end of level 1, students participate in basic exchanges, identify elements of meaning, and present information on familiar and predictable topics. Sorry, there's a C missing in there. Using high frequency vocabulary, et cetera, et cetera. This language is taken directly from the Nebraska Department of Education World Language Standards. So you can manipulate that, the course level expectations, however you wish for those. And then it kind of goes down here, topics and themes. Again, we go for greetings, all about me, recreation, school, career, shopping, running errands, food, and health. And down at the bottom, these tabs, level 1, for whatever language you teach, level 2, the themes are all the same. Level 3, again, themes are all the same for those. Excuse me. The estimated time frame, this, again, you can manipulate however you wish. I just broke it down into kind of an even split throughout the year. We have 18 weeks per semester at the school. And so 3 units per semester, 6 weeks for each unit, that seemed the most logical. However, in practice, the second semester tended to be a little bit more busy. So units 4, 5, and 6, they kind of got cut down a little bit with that. But again, that's okay. And then here for the empower learners and unit level learning objectives, these were those I can statements. So for the school and career, I can talk about what classes and supplies I have at school. Those were those I can statements. And these work for whatever language you teach. If you teach French, you will have to be able to talk about what classes you take at school and the supplies you have. If you teach Chinese, that can be another one of the themes and topics that you have as well for those kinds of things. Yes, the curriculum map will be shared with you. So once this presentation is up on the guest lecture World Series website, you can go back into this presentation. Sorry, to move my tab. You go back into this presentation. No. See, Crystal, you're not the only one that technology does not work for. Where's my presentation? There we go. So this slideshow will be up on the guest lecture World Series web, or the language website. And then you just click this link here and you will be able to have your own scope and sequence for those. So here we have the I can statements. And then next you can talk about what vocabulary that you're going to focus on. So for my unit 1, that's the greetings and all about me. You need some basic greeting phrases, some small talk questions and answers like, where are you from? What's your name? How are you doing? Those kinds of things. We talk about descriptive adjectives. What are you like as a person? I'm tall, I'm short, I'm creative, those types of words on here. And these, when you're putting them together, I'll explain how I pick and choose which specific words and phrases I use and where it comes from, where all these resources come from. This next one here I put in red. This is the grammar section. I will be the first to admit I have a love-hate relationship with grammar. I believe it is extremely useful because it provides a meaningful repetitive structure for students to follow. It helps them recognize new terminology and words that they haven't studied in class before. If they can recognize patterns within the language, the grammar is extremely useful for that. However, current best practices and methodology for teaching with communicative language theory, explicit grammar instruction has mixed results when improving a student's proficiency in the language. So with this section here, this is probably where you're going to have to do the most adjusting and determining of what your students learn. I am trying to follow a comprehensible input methodology in which the grammar focus, they use things like pop-up grammar, and they focus mainly on repetitive and high frequency structures with that. So in this section here, I only did this for the first level, but I have included a set of structures that I try to focus on within these units. So for instance, yo soy, yo no soy, I am not. When you're describing yourself, this. Él, ella, es, él, ella, no es. He is, she is, he is not, she is not. Those kinds of things when you're talking about yourself and greeting people, different types of phrases. So in this section, the structure section, this is probably where if you take this curriculum model, you'll have to redesign it to your own standards and liking. Also, the last part in each of these, I have a cultural focus because culture, it's very difficult to teach a foreign language outside of a cultural context. So these are some themes and ideas that you can take to integrate culture into the curriculum. For instance, in this first one, we talk about different greeting styles in different countries on here. Another one that came up a couple of years ago is how the coronavirus pandemic impacted some of those greeting rituals around the world. For instance, here in the United States, we're pretty comfortable with our personal space, so that 6 feet distance in between individuals, that wasn't too big of a problem for us. However, in a lot of cultures across the world, particularly in Spanish-speaking countries, they tend to get very close with each other when they're greeting. We have kisses on the cheek, those hugs, that kind of a thing. But the coronavirus didn't allow people to do those. So I actually had a very, very interesting discussion with my Spanish 2 students. One of the students piped up when we were having this. She's like, wow, this must be really, really hard for people then if they greet each other in this kind of a close-knit way. They can't do that anymore. It has to be really hard for them. It's like, yes, they have empathy. Also a good thing for my students. I think another section that I might have missed, knowledge application section in the scope and sequence. So these are ideas for how you can assess your students, different projects you can do if you use integrated performance assessments. These are some examples of things that you can look at. So for, let's take a look at the unit 5 over here. Unit 5 is our food unit. And for some of those integrated performance assessments, you can create maybe a food pyramid in the target language. You can create student polls about their favorite foods, the ones they like or dislike. You can have the students make recommendations for healthy versus unhealthy foods, for those kinds of things. And this is an example for the Spanish 1 level or the language level 1. In level 2, you have a lot of the same sections in here. So you have the course expectations, topic, theme, time frame, but I did add an additional section of review vocabulary. So one of the great things about the spiral curriculum is that embedded and very deliberate review of previous concepts so that you give your students that very, very strong knowledge base to build off of. In the review vocabulary, for like this first section, they would have to review their descriptive adjectives, some of the family members, and some of the sequencer words like first, then, later, etc. In the review vocabulary, it takes bits and pieces from the different chapters in the previous level and puts them all into one. So that the target vocabulary for the current level, they would need these words in here to kind of help reinforce the information in this target level. The last tab I have over here is standards targets. These are based off of the Nebraska World Language Standards here, and I do have this link if you want to click that and take a look at those. But these are kind of the standards target for each of our students, and these are in the language from the American Council of Teaching for Foreign Languages. Ideally, by the end of level 1 course or level 2 course, at least 80% of the students should be able to reach the following levels of proficiency. So at the end of level 1, for their interpersonal communication standard, ideally, for my school, I said that my students should be able to reach a novice mid level. For the interpretational, I said that this one should be a little bit higher because a student's comprehension and understanding should be a little bit higher than what they can actually produce. So this one would be a novice high. And again, you can adjust this however you feel your students can adequately reach at your school. If you have a high level or a high demographic of students of color, you might be able to reach some higher levels with this. For the school where I taught at Freeman, our demographics were very homogenous. We were a pre-K through 12 school with about approximately 425 students, and we had 5 students of color. So for instance, our culture standards, they were a little bit lower in this, but if you go to a more urban kind of a school, you might be able to kick this up a lot higher with that. So once this presentation is done, you will have access to this scope and sequence here for that. That's probably the best part of this presentation for you today. But just a couple of things. I did mention if you use this kind of a model, it will require you to go off your textbook. The textbooks, at least from the different curriculums I've seen, like I said, they're very good at scaffolding grammar. You start with the basic sentence structure, you start with the verb and noun agreement, and then you go on to matching the verb, the noun, and then the time frame of, the verb tense and all of that. But they don't really do a good job of scaffolding and spiraling communication situations or the vocabulary. So there's not a whole lot of review in those. It is very, very important that you supplement this curriculum with as much information as you can. You can start with the textbook because it does have a lot of good resources in there, but I will go through and give some tips and tricks for supplementing the curriculum so that you have all those practice materials available. In my spiral curriculum, my main focus is always going to be communication. What do the students need in order to communicate? What should they be able to do in order to communicate with that? So you can think about communication situations. So for an example with this one situation they might find themselves in is talking with friends about the activities that they like and dislike. And you can kind of think of where this situation is going to come up because many of these situations are going to repeat themselves over and over. Probably going to be in your most elementary level, Spanish 1 or Spanish 2, French 1, French 2, etc. But you can have other ones, such as talking with different people about your family and special occasions. This one, it can be almost universal through all the levels. Talk to people about your weekend plans, what you do in your free time. Accepting declining invitations for plans and special occasions. This is something a little bit higher level with those communication situations. So it's probably your level 2, your level 3, maybe even your level 4 with that. Understanding a weather report. So being able to take an authentic document or an authentic use of the language, whether it's a newscasting report or a weather report in a newspaper, that's an essential skill for a world language learner. Following along during the events of a sporting competition, if you're watching something on TV or listening to something on the radio, being able to hear something and simultaneously understand it, that takes years of practice. So this is one I put at the level 3 of an objective for that. And being able to interact with travel officials and hotel employees while on vacation. This is something, again, a little bit higher. So another thing to think about for your curriculum is how are your students going to actually use this language to communicate? When I was deciding what vocabulary to use in each of these, I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with this, the Chuckit Bucket. This is a concept that Carrie Toth came up with. And this is one of those proponents of comprehensible input teaching. When you think about what vocabulary to teach, it's very important that you stick with the most high frequency vocabulary. And they talk about sheltering vocabulary a lot with this. So while I've given you in that scope and sequence some general categories of vocabulary, when you're thinking about specific words and phrases, you can use this model here. So in the small circles, the for life, that's the most essential, the highest frequency vocabulary. That's the one that you explicitly teach your students and you repeat as much as possible. The necessary and useful ones, they're ones that are moderate to high frequency, but not necessarily essential. You could get away without using them. The rest of it goes into the Chuckit Bucket. And the Chuckit Bucket is the biggest category of words because one of the proponents with comprehensible input is sheltering vocabulary. So a lot of it, your students are probably not going to need to know on a regular basis. And this you can kind of use to scaffold the vocabulary throughout the years. The for life, you definitely want to hit those in the first year because that's what your students are going to remember the most. And then as you go through the levels, level 2, level 3, you can include some more of the useful and necessary vocabulary. Chuckit Bucket, try to avoid using them as much as possible in terms of an explicit lesson for that because your students might not remember it. And if it's not all that high frequency, they may not even use it a whole lot. So that's one way that you can kind of pick and choose which vocabulary you teach them. Probably a big question with this is how do you assess on a spiral curriculum? And realistically, it's not all that different from a layered curriculum. For my classes, I tried to stick with the 4 main skill sets with learning foreign language. They're reading comprehension, listening comprehension, writing demonstration, and speaking demonstration. And we would practice each of these skills on a very, very regular basis. We would do reading and listening activities every single week, which my students absolutely loved. Huge amount of sarcasm with that one. But it was essential for them to learn these things. And for each of my tests and quizzes, we would try to hit these 4 skill sets. And I have some examples here of what you can do to help your students with each of their comprehension and demonstration skills. So for reading, They could read an authentic document and answer questions. They could take phrases and put them in logical order. If they have a writing demonstration, this is a very wide variety of options you have depending on which theme you're teaching and which topic you're focusing on. They could write a pen pal letter. They could write an advertisement on a poster. They could rewrite the ending or the beginning of a story. These are just ideas for you to use in your classroom. And again, while I use Spanish as my main example, this can work for any language that you teach. If you are the German teacher, if you are the Chinese teacher, French, Arabic, Vietnamese teacher, this would work for you. So you could use these. Another very important part of using a spiral curriculum, you can use the textbook resources like their audio files and their text files, but it's probably going to be necessary that you use some extra supplemental material. And I have a couple of pages of extra resource lists you can use. So for instance, some of these are really amazing. Like one of my favorites is Audiolingua. If you need extra audio files for practice, this is a great website, and you have multiple different languages to use. So they have Spanish, they have over 1,200 resources. Italian, you have Arabic here, we have Chinese. And the good thing with these are if you, let's see, we'll click on this one. For each of these audio files here, it will give you kind of a rundown of what, first of all, what level these would be at. These are in the Council for the European Foreign Language Teaching, I think CEFR levels. So a B1 would probably be an intermediate mid to an intermediate high level. It would give you the time frame for each of these and the basic topic for those. Let's see. So like an A2 would be a slightly lower one with this one. And you would have the ability to play these audio files for your students for them. So we can just give an example for this one.
您好，请问您的儿子今年多大了？
他14岁了，上初中1年级。
他经常玩电脑游戏吗？
经常玩，每天都玩。有时候他玩得很上瘾，都不想跟我们一起吃饭，一直在房间里玩。
And so each of these audio files, you can actually download them and put these files into your learning management system. If you use Canvas, if you use Google Classroom, you could download these as a file and put them on the website for the students, or you can embed them here. So I really like this website. Another one, oh, there's it gonna go again. Probably the most difficult resources to find are those reading and listening examples. So that's what the majority of these supplemental resources are. So these up here, the first two, these are sound files where you can get little snippets of the language and create questions and answers for your students to use. Most of these are free as well. There are a couple here where you can get a premium account or, sign in for a cost, and it will give you some access to more resources, but most of these are free here. These top 5, these are general languages, so they can go for whichever language you have, 50 languages. Well, let's see. They have a variety. It's not just Spanish, but a whole lot of other ones in here. I'm going to keep on top of the chat. So you can scroll down here. You can click on whichever map section you're going to use. So like the green here, this would be the Arabic ones. We have Russian up here. And there are apps for some of these websites as well for those. Some of these down here, these are specific to Spanish. Like for instance, these last ones down here, these are the ones I use quite frequently with some of my classes. This one, for Spanish, you can narrow down what audio file you want to use. So if you want to go by level, topic, grammar, it'd give you all sorts of different options you can do. So for that, you'd search from here, and you just pick and choose with those. And again, like the other websites, it will give you a determination, like this one will be intermediate Spanish. And some of these would actually come with video as well. And you'd have the script down here. These you can download as audio files and put into your learning management system. You have the script here. There's a little bit of a quiz. Sometimes they have activities that go along with them as well. So that's another example for those. This page here, mostly these are reading practices and actual texts for those. So I know, Crystal, you mentioned it's really, really hard to find a lot of Chinese resources and texts for classes. So these would be some great websites for you folks as well. You can choose your level, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and then choose whichever topic you would want to focus on. I like this website because actually, for somebody who does not speak a word of Mandarin, this one, you can actually go over and hover above the words and it will highlight them, give you pronunciation and what they mean, or all these kinds of things. And then you have different activities down here for answering questions and practice activities for those. So you can use any of these supplemental resources lists for whenever you are setting up your curriculum. And the last thing I do want to talk about is how effective is this? Because I know we need to have a little bit of data to back some of these things up. Realistically, I don't have a lot of data, but I do have some really important things that will back up some of these things. The way I collected my data, I used Google Forms on here, and I just collected them as a form of an informal self-assessment survey for that. So at the end of each week, I would give my students this Google form on their Canvas homepage. Canvas was the learning management system. So they would give their name, and then I would have the weekly objective listed here with the I can statement. So I can describe my core classes and teachers at school in the target language. And then they would choose how well they could do this. Could they do this with a lot of help, asking a lot of questions using their resource list, their vocab list, etc. Could they do this with some help, maybe occasionally checking their notes, but overall getting the main ideas? Can they do this without help? Is it just automatically in their brains? Or can they teach another person how to do this? That's one of the best ways to learn something, is being able to teach another person how to do these skills. And so I do have a little bit of data. I have multiple pages of Excel spreadsheets with this. The great thing about using Google Forms, if you have this as your assessment tool, it will automatically download all the data into an Excel spreadsheet. So I have a couple of example students here. This particular student, this information is taken from my Excel spreadsheet. So the main objective was talking about what classes they have at school and what they are like. So these first two pieces of data, I had this girl as a freshman, and this first one on November 13th, this is when we first started this objective or unit. So she could do this with maybe some help after a week of work with that. This one, it was a couple of weeks later when we got closer to the test and the end of the unit. How well could she do this? Again, it was with some help, but it had been a couple of weeks since we had looked at this specific objective. And then the last bit, this was from this year. So these first two, I had her as a freshman. This was her as a sophomore. When we reviewed this at the beginning of the unit, she said she could do this without any help. So there is a little bit of evidence that a spiraled curriculum will work and help your students with their retention. And these numbers down here at the bottom, this is looking at all of the students' responses within this particular class. So the very first time we introduced this, week 2, 2 students needed a lot of help, 8 students needed a little bit of help, and 10 students could do this without help. 4 weeks later, those numbers slightly changed with that. So nobody needed a lot of help. Some still needed a little bit of help with 6 students. 9 were able to do this with no help, and 2 of them felt confident enough that they could teach this. And then a year later, with this exact same objective, these were the responses I got. Now, I know the numbers are not exactly adding up. The reason for this is week 6, I had 3 students who were absent for that test, and then I added an extra student a year later. But still, the data, it kind of trended in an upward model, so that students were able to understand all of these and retain the information. The second one, with this student, actually, he suffered a concussion in between his sophomore year and his junior year, and he did show improvement throughout the year, but then he kind of had a backtrack during his junior year. So this one is one of the objectives from Unit 5. I can describe various dishes and basic ingredients in Spanish. The first time he saw this back in 2021, in February, he could do this with some help. By the end of the unit, he felt confident enough he could teach another person how to do this. And then this year, when we came back and reviewed these kinds of things, again, after his concussion, he had several different things on protocol. It was back down to poca ayuda, but then again afterwards, once we had reassessed this for a few weeks, he was able again to do this without help. And these informal surveys that I give the students, these are just one piece of data. I do have actual tests and assessments that show the scores of these students from year to year, but this is just an example of how a spiral curriculum can benefit you in your classes. So the data is a little bit mixed, but again, it's reliant on a student's self-assessment. And sometimes students, they don't always have the best point of view of their own learning for those. But general improvement is shown over the years. And I think the last thing I have for you is just where can you find more information? There was an actual study of a spiral curriculum model through teaching English in, I believe it was either Brazil or Argentina, but here's the article for that one. If you're looking for the textbook or the book, The Natural Approach by Stephen Krashen, this is the information for where you can find it. But other than that, I think I've talked for almost an hour straight. So I think now we can kind of open it up for questions, I suppose. If there are questions, I suppose.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful.
Sure. And yeah, once this presentation or the slideshow is put up into the guest lecture series, you will be able to find that link for that scope and sequence and be able to copy it into your own drives and manipulate it however you'd like.
So you're going to share the curriculum map as well, right?
Yes, that's in the presentation. So let me find it here. It's on the So once the slide information is posted, this will be on slide 12 on there. So you just click on this link here, spiral curriculum scope and sequence, and then, yep, you'll have your very own map for it. And actually, hang on a second, let me see if I can. How about we just do this? I'll copy the link and post it right there in the chat window for you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure, not a problem. Let's see. Have I ever seen a spiral curriculum effectively implemented in a subject other than language? Me personally, no, I have not, but the study by Norman Hare with the science curriculum and spiraling that's another example of outside the foreign language arena. Oh, it says we need permission. Let me see here. Probably have to open up the okay. Okay, so this link that I've shared right now, this one, it should be the open link with it. I think I had this restricted one on there before. I apologize. Let's see. Talk about more about the sentence pattern and grammar and spiral curriculum. With this one, I can, yes, but it depends on what methodology you use to teach. If you wish, you can take some of the grammar patterns from your textbook materials. Like for instance, with Spanish, it's a very, very highly organized and very specific structure of verb conjugations and talking about verb tenses and all of these different grammatical structures. So you can follow that kind of a model. I personally prefer the comprehensible input method, where we focus on specific structures or phrases that are more commonly used. And when we see words that are similar in pattern, like tango and tiene, tango I have, tiene he or she has, we would just do a little bit of a side note grammar or a pop-up grammar off to the side with that. But that one in the scope and sequence, that would be the one where you'd need to do the most editing with it. So let's see if I can. Oh, I lost my Zoom. Where'd I go? With that. So in the scope and sequence here, where I've put that structure in red, that would probably be where you as a teacher would need to make the most adjustments in there, because I didn't put anything for level 2 in those sections. And that one is probably going to be the most divergent, because grammar structures across different languages are probably the most different with those. Oh, good, the link works. Yes. Those are some great questions. Any other ones?
Can you share some of the different activities for different levels?
Different activities.
I mean, for the same unit, for I mean, ideas for teachers to use for the same unit. I mean, same theme, but on different levels. Do you have suggestions for that?
Right. Well, again, with the spiral curriculum, it's good that you can like use and reuse some of the activities and things that you do in the classroom. For instance, with Unit 4, that one is shopping and running errands. But some of the activities in my first year, we would do, we would talk about different clothing styles with that. So occasionally we would have students do a fashion show, but those are really only for the really outgoing kinds of students. Some of the time we would have them kind of look at Hollywood fashion and give like a commentary for those kinds of things. We would also work with using money and currency in that unit. And one of the favorite activities for my students was in year 2, we would do kind of a mock market day, because one of the objectives for that unit 4 in level 2 is being able to bargain in an open air market. So what I would have is it's really kind of a dynamic activity where students would be in small groups and they'd have their own little store, and some of members of their group would have to go around and bargain with other stores for their wares. So those are kind of a fun activity with that. And then in the 3rd year, we kind of expand that point of view to what it would look like in a whole city. So what are some errands you'd have to run in the city? You'd have to go get your hair cut. You'd have to pick up medicine at the pharmacy. You'd have to, you know, go to the doctor, etc. So I'd have the students create these large maps of just any kind of a city. And then we'd use those maps as kind of a teaching tool throughout the unit. So we'd start with, where are these places located relative to other places. So the pharmacy would be close to the hospital, or the cemetery would be far away from the factory, those kinds of things. And then when we got to using directions, we'd have the students' own maps as the mock cities, where they'd have to determine, how do you get from the hairdresser down to the aquarium? And they'd have to give each other directions of how to get between each of those. So even though with the general themes being very, very similar, sometimes the activities can be wildly different with them. But it is reusing and using some of those previous phrases and communication snippets within each of the levels in there. So it is very useful with that one.
Thank you. It sounds very exciting activities for me.
They're a lot of fun with those.
Yeah.
Let's see, a couple of questions in there. This curriculum I've only used specifically for the last 2 years. When the coronavirus hit, it was kind of, it kind of threw everything for a loop. So I've only been able to successfully implement it for the last 2 years. So it's a very, very limited amount of data for that. But with the students, I've seen just within 1 to 2 years of using this, the students are very, they are much more engaged with the material. They're a lot less stressed out with it, that having that routine and those review and repetitive practices, they are a lot more engaged with it. And, you know, they have more moments of recall when they're in the classroom. Be like, oh yeah, we talked about this last year. Oh yeah, I remember this and such, even without the notes that they took. There is a higher amount of retention with them, at least from what I see. Another question, when I go over stuff that I've taught former years, how long does it take to reteach and refresh? With that one, it depends on, well, first of all, it depends on the personality of the students and how long I spent teaching them the first time with it. I would say probably not more than a week. With some of the more difficult concepts, usually a week is sufficient time to refresh their memories. And if this was continued on for a 3rd year, I'm sure that time would be a lot less as well, because of the added repetition and review. It would take a lot less time than that, especially if, you know, in a traditional layered curriculum, you'd have to take a lot of time to review and reteach with that. It is significantly less time, especially since that's built into the curriculum. Ideally, with levels 2 and 3, just that first week would be basic review of everything that was done in the previous year. So that's a very good question. It doesn't usually take a lot of time. It depends on how well it was taught and implemented the first time with that. For the first year new teacher, oh, bless your soul for coming in here. Where should we start if we would like to create our own spiral curriculum? It does seem like a huge project. It is a very huge project if you are in your first year. In terms of everything being overwhelmed, I would probably, if I were a first year new teacher and I was the only language teacher with this, I would probably recommend working a whole lot of this during the summer and implementing it right away. Because if you are the only language teacher and you are coming into a new school where you're going to be tasked with teaching 5 different classes a day and trying to maintain good teaching practices with different themes and topics year to year, it's going to be very difficult for you. So this one would be a very good model for you to do. I would, again, as a first year teacher, there are some things that you should be doing, even if you are not, you know, the only language teacher. Talk with as many language teachers as you can, lean on as many teachers as you can, find as many resources as you can. You can use this resource list here. This list is not, this wasn't just a pre-prescribed list that I found. This was me taking time, you know, during planning periods and outside of class, just searching for information like Spanish audio files or example text in the language. And these were just sites that I found with that. So it is a lot of work for a teacher to do, particularly one who's a new first year, but the more work you do at the very beginning, you will have a lot less work down the line. So that is something to consider. And if you want to create your own, I would definitely recommend using the scope and sequence, and you can edit it and manipulate it however you'd like and however works best for you, and integrate some of those supplemental resources. So that'd be a good place to start. Good questions today. So Crystal, would you have an idea of when the materials would be posted on the NDE website?
I will try my best, but part of the work uploading is not, I cannot do it because it's on NDE internal website. So I
Okay.
need help to, transform them to YouTube. Once that is done, it's like within a day I can do everything, but I have to wait till people are available to help me to transfer. So at least, a week maximum. Sometimes when people are available, just, one day. And if they are not available, I might have to wait for 4 or 5 days. So 7 days for sure.
That sounds good. That's a fair amount of time.
Oh, one of the teacher is putting up his hand, I think. Yu Lao Shi.
Hello. I have two questions. Number one, I feel this curriculum actually fits with the lingo folio. Do you use it? Because it actually shows how much the students wrote like every year, especially it's like the same topic every year. So if like students can compare, it's the same as the perfect fitting for using with this curriculum. That's a question number one. Question number two is because a different topic, we know it's a spiral. So at the beginning, maybe it's easy, then getting harder and harder. So are you actually using even time for each topic, or actually we will make a difference? The reason why I ask is because we also prepare students for Apple test, and Apple is something you cannot cover all the topic for them just in short time. So will you do like, oh, I will try cover some topic, like all the topic first, and then work on some of those importance later? So that's two questions I want to ask. Thank you.
Well, the first question, I have heard of Linguafolio, and I have practiced with it a little bit. I have not formally implemented it into use, but I do try to follow the model as much as possible, creating that portfolio for the students to use and having them be able to see their progress. So I use the principles of the Linguafolio in the curriculum. With regard to the second question, I love the Apple test. I use that as well for my students for the Seal of Illiteracy. And you're right, it is absolutely not possible to cover absolutely every single topic that is needed in order to be sufficiently prepared for that. The thing is, with this curriculum, I have only given 3 years of material to use. I left that 4th year open because a lot of schools kind of tend to go many different directions with that last year of language learning. With me, what I did was I created a class that was kind of a bridge between a high school Spanish class and a college Spanish class at maybe like the 300 level. because from my experience, a college, there is a very, very wide divide between a high school Spanish class and a college level class. Whereas college, it's very much focused on literature and grammar for those kinds of things. So I tried to adjust my fourth year or my fourth level to kind of bridge the gap between those two. But different schools might do different things. For instance, if you are qualified to teach an AP course, this actually, the spiral curriculum would help feed into that AP course work where they have the 6 thematic units. They're not the same as ours, but they would be able to easily integrate into those 6 topics with that. And while the overall themes that are being taught are the same for the 3 years, there are certain differences within those themes of topics and things that are taught. For instance, with that 4th unit with shopping and running errands, in the first year, we do kind of focus on clothing and talking about costs of different items. In the second year, we talk about bargaining practices, different economic systems of, goods and services and bartering for those kinds of things. In the 4th year, it's about different locations around town, being able to run errands, what you do at different places with it. So there is a difference between some of the subtopics within those 6 general themes. But you are right, within 3 to 4 years, it's almost impossible to hit every single topic that's needed for that. But that repetition, it will help reinforce kind of the more common themes and topics with it. So the students will at least have a good base that they can build off of and kind of expand their own knowledge with it. Very good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Danielle, I actually have your slides uploaded into Google folder. So is it okay I share with everybody?
Absolutely. Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. Here it is in the chat. So
if it doesn't work, please let me know. I think, yeah, on that first one, it had restricted. I will double check on my files to make sure everybody can view it here just really quickly.
your slides, here is the slides. And I think I give access to everybody.
Okay. I think it should be available to be viewed by everybody. If not, please let me or Crystal know and we will make that adjustment so you can see these presentation slides.
Yeah, it seems we don't have. Oh, yay.
Good deal.
Good. But the recording, well, I need them to help me to transfer to the public website. So it would take some days maximum.
That's all right. I tend to talk on and on and on. So, just the basic information that people need will be like the files and the links. So.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Okay. By the way, I have already shared some screenshots on Facebook. Sorry, not notifying you ahead of time.
Hey, that's okay. I will share them on my Facebook page and shamelessly self-promote. So.
Okay, it seems we don't have any questions, and maybe let's call it a day and enjoy our weekend. Thank you everybody for coming. Thanks Danielle for doing this. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear.